on the track like what up, though? I know who I am, but they thinking they too sharp. Running a scam like Cutco, but I have a plan. I hope you plan to keep up, though. I don't think you understand that you're greater than that life they try to sell you. So hold up, there's something I need to tell you, and I think that this thing can really help you. These suckers try to tell us that we can't shake it, but my God, I know where we can take it. And I know every day you're facing your giants, but my God, I believe we're destined to triumph. Now let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. There will always be more doubters than supporters. When the vision seems too big, they either gon' hate or ignore ya. I guess it is what it is, but you just gotta stay focused. Ay, don't put your hope in the hopeless. Ay, remember that you are all chosen. Ay, and you can move mountains to motion. And these suckers try to tell us that we can't shake it, but my God, I know where we can take it. And I know every day you're facing your giants, but my God, I believe we're destined to triumph. Now let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Things start moving slow, and they keep closing doors, and you don't wanna move no more. Remember, just refocus on the goal. Things start moving slow, and they keep closing doors, and you don't wanna move no more. Remember, just refocus on the goal. Now let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Yo, sweet Jesus, hop on the track like what up, though? I know who I am, but they thinking they too sharp. Running a scam like Cutco, but I have a plan. I hope you plan to keep up, though. I don't think you understand that you're greater than that life they try to sell you. So hold up, there's something I need to tell you, and I think that this thing can really help you. And these suckers try to tell us that we can't shake it, but my God, I know where we can take it. And I know every day you're facing your giants, but my God, I believe we're destined to triumph. Now let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. There will always be more doubters than supporters. When the vision seems too big, they either gon' hate or ignore ya. I guess it is what it is, but you just gotta stay focused. Ay, don't put your hope in the hopeless. Ay, remember that you are all chosen. Ay, and you can move mountains to motion. And these suckers try to tell us that we can't shake it. But my God, I know where we can take it. And I know every day you're facing your giants. But my God, I believe we're destined to triumph. Now let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Things start moving slow, and they keep closing doors, and you don't wanna move no more. Remember, just refocus on the goal. Things start moving slow, and they keep closing doors, and you don't wanna move no more. Remember, just refocus on the goal. Now let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statements calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticisms of my work and ideas, but if I sought to answer all the criticisms that crossed my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms.
Well, peace, friends. I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek Church in Lansing, Michigan, and I am so excited that you are here with us. This is our second year that we've produced a staged reading of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from Birmingham Jail. I felt like it was super important for our mostly white church here at Sycamore Creek to hear the words of Martin Luther King Jr., and not only to hear them, but to act on them. I could never have imagined last year when we did the staged reading, the year that would follow that. And Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from Birmingham Jail guided me as a white pastor over this last year to not just sit on the sidelines, but to be involved with probably the most significant civil rights year that we've had in my lifetime, at least. Tonight, I'm joined in the studio with some really special guests for episode 1 of 4 of Letter from Birmingham Jail. Of course, Rico Bruce Wade is here with me, the award-winning local actor, director. You directed this year's Letter from Birmingham Jail.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for including me in this project.
We had a great time kind of brainstorming how to do this creative. Like, we couldn't do it on a stage with people in person, but that gave us a new frame to be creative on.
Yes. The limitations actually ended up being a benefit.
Yeah. Also here tonight with Bishop David Allen Bard of the Michigan Conference of the United Methodist Church. You'll see him here on the screen. He's on the top there. And Bishop Gregory V. Palmer of the West Ohio Conference of the United Methodist Church. Thank you two so much for joining us tonight.
Glad to be here.
So, Rico, why do we have some Methodist bishops on the screen with us tonight?
Bishop Palmer and I are asking ourselves the same question.
We need the voice of the clergy in the room. The limitations that our current situation gave us meant that we had to approach this project differently. We weren't going to have people live in the same room. And we didn't want to have actors in near proximity as we created this piece. So as we looked at reimagining this project, we came to the idea of actually creating a dialogue. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote this letter to 8 men specifically, clergymen from Birmingham who were advocating for a more reasonable approach. They wrote a letter called Call for Unity. King wrote his letter from Birmingham Jail in response to the Call for Unity. In researching the Call for Unity, I learned that 2 of the signees were Methodist bishops. And I thought
when you told me that, I had a sinking pit in my stomach.
And since we are here in a Methodist church, I thought it would be helpful and it would be valuable to have input from actual Methodist bishops. I've never even played one on TV.
Before you unearthed this piece, I thought that this was just part of my story as a white American. And now I've come to realize this is part of my story as a United Methodist clergy person, white as well. So we got 2 bishops, 2 Methodist bishops.
This is...
Again, thank you, Bishop Bard and Bishop Palmer, for joining us for this.
Yes, thank you so much.
Were you 2 aware of the bishop connection to this letter before we reached out to you?
A bit. I don't know that I'd ever spent a lot of time with it, but I've learned a lot just preparing for this evening.
I see, Bishop Palmer, you're nodding your head yes, you were familiar with it.
Yeah, not in the sense of being a historian, but I mean, it had come under my nose at some point, and it was easy to recollect.
So this year, because of COVID, we decided to film our production of Letter from Birmingham Jail ahead of time and then release it in 3 segments over 4 episodes. Mm-hmm. That seems kind of strange, but we're going to do 1/3 of the letter each of the first 3 episodes, and on the 4th episode, we're going to stitch them all together.
Yes.
So each episode, you and I will gather in the studio with different people, sometimes the actors, sometimes bishops, sometimes local significant leaders. And we're going to talk over what MLK has to say for us today. Mm-hmm. So we would especially encourage you right now to take a minute to like, subscribe, share this out. Let people know this is going on. That's a really simple way to get the word out. And we'd love for you as well to comment throughout the whole episode tonight, your own thoughts and questions as you watch and listen. And while all of this is free, if you'd like to donate to the work of building a movement of anti-racist churches in the Lansing region called CORE, or Congregations Organizing for Racial Reconciliation, you can do so by going to sycamorecreekchurch.org/give, and you'll choose Other and then write CORE in the memo line. Or as well, while you're at it, be sure to like CORE's Facebook page and keep up with what we're doing, building this movement of anti-racist churches. So Rico, is there anything else that we need to know before we dive into the first act of Letter from Birmingham Jail?
We have separated the letter into 3 parts. This first section will introduce the dialogue, the tension between the 2 characters. I think that's probably it.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's get to Letter from Birmingham Jail.
It's Thursday. Easter Sunday's coming up. You know, I used to walk 5 miles to church every Sunday. Church wasn't but 2 blocks away, but I'd take the long way around. So you ain't got no excuse. I expect to see everybody, especially you, Sister Tammy. You might want to plan on going twice. But right now, I got a hot new one for you.
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
I believe segregation should and will end. You know my heart, but this will encourage violence. It just takes us backwards. And that this is anarchy, and it's not our people. I mean, there's no argument with the goals, Earl. I know you've preached on it. I've preached on it. Let me look. Well, yeah, this is good. It's very clear. We expressed understanding that honest convictions in racial matters could properly be pursued in the courts, but urged that decisions of those courts should in the meantime be peacefully obeyed. Since that time, there's been some evidence of increased forbearance. That's like a word. Forbearance and willingness to face facts. Responsible citizens have undertaken to work on various problems which cause racial friction and unrest. We all have opportunity for a new constructive and realistic approach to racial problems. However, we're now confronted by a series of demonstrations by some of our Negro citizens directed and led in part by outsiders. We recognize the natural impatience of people who feel that their hopes are slow in being realized, but we are convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. Yeah, exactly. Hey, is Milt agreed to sign on? Good. I mean, this just makes sense. Yeah, have a happy Easter.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statements calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticisms of my work and ideas, but if I sought to answer all the criticisms that crossed my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. See, I think that I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state. Several months ago, the affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program, if such were deemed necessary. Now, we readily consented. And when the hour came, we lived up to our promise. So I, along with other members of my staff, am here because I was invited here. Now, I am here because I have organizational ties here. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
We have said, we have preached that no person's freedom is safe unless every person's freedom is equally protected.
We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives in the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I am sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no other alternative.
We agree rather with certain local Negro leadership, which has called for honest and open negotiation of racial issues in our area.
In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all of these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Now, Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Now, its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings at Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in the nation. Now, these are the hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. Then came the opportunity last September to talk with some of the leaders of the economic community. In these negotiating sessions, certain promises were made by the merchants, such as the promise to remove the humiliating racial signs from the stores. On the basis of these promises, we agreed to call a moratorium on any type of demonstration. As the weeks and months unfolded, we realized that we were the victims of a broken promise. Now, the signs remain. As in so many experiences of the past, we were confronted with blasted hopes, and the dark shadow of a deep disappointment settled upon us. So, we have no alternative except that of preparing for direct action, whereby we present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. See, we are not unmindful of the difficulties involved, so we've decided to go through a process of self-purification. And at these workshops of nonviolence, we repeatedly ask ourselves the questions: are you able to accept the blows without retaliating? Or are you able to endure the ordeals of jail?
Yes, but why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path?
You are exactly right in your call for negotiation. Indeed, this is the purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. I just referred to the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor. This may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly worked and preached against the violent tension. But there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension that is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, we must see the need of having nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that would help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. Now, I would therefore concur with you and your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in a tragic effort to live in a monologue rather than dialogue. One of the basic points in your statement is that the action that I and my associates have taken in Birmingham is untimely. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it is an historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture. We know through painful experience that freedom never voluntarily is given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed.
Wait. We respectfully urge those who strongly oppose desegregation to pursue their convictions in the courts and in the meantime to peacefully to abide by the decisions of those same courts. We recognize that our problems cannot be solved in our strength or on the basis of human wisdom alone. The situation that confronts us calls for earnest prayer, for clear thought, for understanding love, and or courageous action. Thus, we call on all people of goodwill to join us in seeking divine guidance as we make our appeal for law and order and common sense.
Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. Now it rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. Now this wait has almost always meant never. And as one of our distinguished jurors once said, justice too long delayed is justice denied.
Wow. The difference between last year and this year, last year you got 100 people, 150 people in our space, and they're on this, the actors are on this stage way up there. And this year you're like right in MLK's face. It's so intimate.
It is, yes.
It is so powerful in that way, feeling the angst of that moment.
Yes.
So, Bishop Palmer, as a black bishop in the United Methodist Church, as you hear the words of MLK brought to life through Nor just does an amazing job. This is his second year playing MLK. What strikes you about their relevance for today, whether that's for the average black person, for a black and white clergy, or for the church or the world as a whole?
Pastor Arthur, thanks for this opportunity, and Bishop Bard, good to be with you also, and for all of those that have helped put this together with you. And the actor really did put himself into it. I didn't have any sense that his passion was feigned, even though I know they were not his words originally. And it may be because the words are so relevant. And so the thought occurs to me as I have reread the Letter from Birmingham Jail and thought about the events of, let's say, the last year, roughly speaking, in terms of racial injustice. In the United States of America in particular, one can say with equal conviction, a lot has changed. And you can also say that the more things change, the more they stay the same. So that the expendability, for example, of Black and brown life in particular in America, often at the hands of those who are convened to provide safety and protection, has been not only profoundly disappointing, but it has been, it has stirred fear in new and fresh ways. There is a woman in the annual conference that I serve who, in the midst of this crisis, texted me one day, and this is a laywoman, and said, "Bishop, I hope you will wear your clergy collar wherever you go." Let me just hit pause. So this is in 2020 and in 2021. Her concern for me as a Black man that if I'm sort of casually dressed, I may not get the same benefit of the doubt. The clergy collar is not a guarantee. She's just simply saying you might get a chance to explain yourself if you're in a traffic stop or whatever. So this is, the words are relevant in that sense, and the kind of crisis that the nonviolent social protest movement, SCLC, et cetera, was trying to precipitate in Birmingham is the crisis that we have now. And the vast majority of it has been nonviolent. There's been a lot of critique, just as the Letter for Unity, is an attempt to protect people and communities from violence. In reality, the primary perpetrators of violence in Birmingham were Bull Connor and his ilk, people in hoods and sheets, et cetera. The other place of relevance is that every age is ripe for some level of social transformation. So it's sort of like righteousness. When you think you've got it, it eludes you. And so we've got to always keep working in the social fabric to really come toward, to use a Wesleyan phrase, to move toward perfection and to keep working on justice. It's not something that you arrive at and you don't have to do anything anymore. It has to continue to be nurtured by our relationships, by our love, by our vigilance, and by our holding one another accountable. And I think the onus these days, as always, as it was in Birmingham, is on institutions. So the former Methodist Bishop in South Africa, Dr. Peter Story, has a quote where he says, "We'd like, as human beings, for institutions to do our sinning," SINNING. We like institutions to do our sinning. And that's what this, the current call for justice is, as well as what was happening in Birmingham. It was personal moral behavior, and it was also institutions that propped up that behavior, that subjugated and suppressed and oppressed particular lives, particular communities, particular racial, ethnic demographics.
Let me go back just for a minute to the very first thing you said, that there is, I suppose, something, there is enough change that things have changed, but the more things change, the more they stay the same. I found this as a white clergy in a predominantly white church putting on this letter in this staged production last year. I found myself kind of heavy and lamenting that it was so relevant, longing for it to be irrelevant. When you hear this, do you have that same lament reaction?
I do have that lament, and while I've seen a lot of change in the last year in response, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, let's use George Floyd as the most dramatic examples, I like to remind myself and all of my neighbors, those are just the incidents that made it to CNN or to whatever your news outlet is. And these indignities go on all the time, but sometimes they get caught on camera and are inescapable. And I'm on a number of institution boards, and I am both heartened that everybody is now creating, if they didn't already have it, or they are reframing their diversity offices as offices of institutional diversity, inclusion, and equity. And so a part of the lament for me is, part of my head and heart says, right time, right place, right thing. A part of it says, it took somebody with their knee on another human being's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I'm just obviously lifting one incident out, for you to decide to reorganize the administration of this college, this university, this public institution. And so that's lamentable and frustrating and painful, even as it gives signs of hope.
Bishop Bard, I wonder, as you watched listen to this as a white bishop, a white clergy in the United Methodist Church, as you heard the words of Paul Hardin, the Methodist bishop that Rico has put in conversation with MLK in this, what strikes you about that today? Does his words sound familiar to you? I mean, for me, I'm listening to it and I'm almost thinking, I've said those things.
Yeah, it's really painful in many ways to listen, knowing that some of that rhetoric has not changed. It's interesting how, you know, the number of times, and it's not been a huge number of times, but how often people have asked me. So I made a statement after the Capitol riot, and immediately I had 3 or 4 emails. Well, did you say anything about the violence this past summer when Black Lives Matter protests were happening? Really interesting kind of, moral equivalence that isn't terribly equivalent. So his words were painful, and I really wanted to dig more deeply into what was going on with him. It's really easy. He obviously missed the boat. I mean, there's two Methodist bishops, Paul Hardin and Norrlyn Harmon, and they missed a moment. They missed the mark. And then I'm asking myself, why did they miss the mark? Where were the failings here? And in part, I think it was a failure of vision. As I read their letter and read Dr. King's letter again, they just didn't see the situation very fully. All of those 8 clergy were white clergy. Who had they been talking to in the Black community in Birmingham? So there was a failure there. And if you remember at the time, this was a time when the Methodist Church was segregated. There was a central jurisdiction in which most of the African-American Methodists were segregated out of the Methodist Church. And so Paul Hardin and Norrlyn Harmon, I'm guessing, did not have any African-American colleagues. Bishop Palmer, you may know that. I'd be surprised if there were any African-American bishops at the time in the early 60s. I didn't find that research. But again, so they're not listening. They're not listening to some voices. Brian Stevenson, the Just Mercy person whose life was portrayed in Just Mercy, talks about leaning into the pain. And as I read the letter, the Call to Unity letter and MLK's letter, you just don't get the sense that these bishops leaned into the pain. And that I think is really critical. That as someone who's white, who doesn't have to worry about wearing a clergy collar, who, if I get pulled over by the police, I'm wondering, was I going too fast? What did I do wrong? And am I going to get a ticket out of this? Not, am I going to come out of this unharmed? I need to be able to hear the stories and lean into the pain. And I'm deeply grateful for colleagues like Bishop Palmer and others who've been willing to share some of those stories with me about some of their experience. So I'm pained. I think they didn't lean into the pain. Adaptive leadership theory. Sorry, this is probably kind of dry, but Ron Heifetz talks about, if you're going to lead change, one of the things you have to do is be able to try to modulate the temperature. But I would say that the temptation for those of us who have power is to always keep the temperature way too tepid. Yes, at some level, you may have to give people some room to engage in the change work, but the temptation of the powerful is always to keep the temperature way too tepid.
The section of this letter that spoke to me this year, and it really speaks to me in this first segment, is the segment about tension. When MLK says, "My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. And I think as a white clergy, I'm always trying to bring the tension down. And MLK is tutoring me to sometimes you got to raise the tension
Yes.
to, as Bishop Palmer mentioned, bring about the perfecting of our love in the social sphere.
Yeah, one time when I was a youth pastor in Dallas, Texas, I was working on my PhD, and I was asked to help lead a adult Sunday school retreat. And at the closing worship, part of what I wanted to do is highlight the work that people still had to do in the world around us. And I read the section of MLK's Letter from Birmingham Jail about why we can't wait, where he goes through this litany of things that African Americans had experienced. And those words are still powerful. Mm-hmm. These are the things that we can't ignore. We've got to keep looking at this and creating change, even when it makes people uncomfortable. We've got to be able to lean into the pain and lean into the discomfort.
Bishop Bard, you mentioned the potential lack of relationships at that time. United Methodist, or it wasn't United yet; it was the Methodist.
Oh, just the Methodist Church.
Methodist Church was segregated with the Central Conference. And Rico, you put the two of them in a room together in this play to create that relationship. And I think back to a conversation that we had at the beginning, and you're the one who unearthed the whole Methodist Bishop thing. I wasn't even familiar with that as you did research about this. And you said to me that Paul Hardin and Nolan Harmon were the moderates of the day, that they were actually trying to respond in goodwill, and MLK references that at the beginning of the letter. How did that, your sense that he was the moderate, or they were the moderates of their day, how did that impact the way that you put this together?
It made it very important. It actually made it, it was important and in some ways easy to showcase the urgency of King's work. These weren't men. They were moderates, but they were men of their place and of that time. They supported the idea of desegregation, and they felt that Birmingham was moving toward justice. King absolutely thought it had to happen now, and it had to be, the process needed to be accelerated. It was important to create that tension between these two characters, and to see that these were men of Birmingham. They knew how perilous the situation was. They knew that on any given Sunday they were looking that it's very possible that someone in the pews was responsible for a bombing somewhere. Birmingham at the time colloquially was called Bombingham. They were committed to bringing their parishioners with them, but they felt that they needed to do it gradually. King upset that process. King and the marchers.
I think that's a question, bishops, that I as a pastor, and I think many pastors are wrestling with in moments like this, is how hard you can push. How high can you bring that tension? How high can you raise the temperature? And you both lead as bishops in a very large institution that's global in nature, and you're always having to, I would imagine, pay attention to the wide spectrum of convictions, socially, theologically, practically, liturgically. We're in our own kind of challenge with that right now as United Methodists around human sexuality. And I wonder, as you think about that, what guidance you hear from MLK for your own leadership amidst such diversity of conviction.
let me pick up on one of the historical strands that was a question about was there any relationship between the bishops of that day? And we did have the racially drawn central jurisdiction, but the bishops did meet together as the Council of Bishops. So there were Black and Anglo bishops that met together, but when they would leave the council meeting, they would go back to their principally segregated annual conferences, segregated by race in the main. There were some exceptions depending on parts of the country. But now to the question that you really did ask, how much can you raise the temperature? There's this appeal in the letter for unity. Why didn't you give more time for the new administration to kind of strut its stuff and move things forward? And King often talked about the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. And so, it's sort of like, is there a gradualism to freedom? I mean, this is not moving from being a primary age person into age-wise into puberty, and certain things are given to you as you mature. This is, how do you treat human beings broadly writ, and how do you treat grown folks, to just use a colloquialism. So and the other thing that he responded to about the gradualism was that he said, every time we've raised the temperature or created the crisis is actually when we've gotten results. So our experience has been, when we go slow, or as he says, are patient, everybody else thinks it's a timeout. These are my words, not King's words. Exactly. So that's, and here's the third thing that I wonder about the clergy who wrote this letter. And obviously I think about, the Methodist bishops involved, but it was ecumenical indeed. That I wonder, I mean, they're trying to keep the lid on things. They're trying to hold the whole. I get all of that. Bishop Bard and I do that all the time, even when we're biting our tongues. And you do it too, Pastor Tom. And I've got two thoughts about that. One of the questions about these clergy is, was it that they were trying to hold the whole, or was it that the atmosphere was so charged that they actually had fear for their own physical well-being? Like, will the Klan come? Will the White Citizens Council come and burn down my house or bomb my office? So the question of personal risk comes to all of us that want social change and transformation. I mean, one of the real questions, during last spring and summer's marches for the dignity of Black and brown lives in particular, and to call for a different kind of policing, was just, I know some people made their decision about showing up just based on COVID, even though their affections and their moral commitments and even their financial contributions supported that work. And there were lots of people saying, hey, I need to do something more at the margins. I've got a family to go home to. So I'm not judging that. I'm simply saying everybody measures personal risk. And that's obviously Martin King was a person, along with others in the movement, especially since they were choosing to be nonviolent, who was willing to say, if, as Esther said, if I perish, I perish. And for the cause.
He talks about going through that process of self-purification. Are we willing to take the blows in our body? And I think that's something that sometimes gets missed in a lot of this. Is I took a class on Martin Luther King when I was at seminary. His amount of writing around the training of active nonviolent resistance. This is a process of training you go through to be willing to receive blows to your body without giving them back. And it's, I think you're reflecting or raising this last year, the question of COVID and personal harm. Some people were more willing to perhaps take the risk of, at the time, what we still weren't totally sure what was going on, than others perhaps were.
Mm-hmm.
Bishop Bard, as you hear this question and you reflect on your own leadership in this broad church, big tent church called United Methodism. By the way, a lot of times when I'm typing United Methodism, I accidentally type Untied Methodism, and I think that's a Freudian slip happening. But how do you hear MLK's words encouraging or challenging you, Bishop Bard?
So, and I really appreciated Bishop Palmer's reminder that there was a council of bishops that included the bishops from the central jurisdiction. Thank you for that. So there was conversation there at least a couple of times a year. I don't know how often the council met in those days. The other historical thing that it's helpful to note, both if there was one small detail that Dr. King got wrong, he did ask about these clergymen who signed the letter. Did they ever say anything when Governor Wallace spoke? And both Nolan Harmon and Paul Hardin did speak out against the statements of Governor Wallace. Mm-hmm. It's not as if they were completely disengaged from some of the struggle. I ran across a story about Bishop Hardin. Bishop Hardin, before he was elected bishop, was a pastor in Birmingham at the First Methodist Church there. And he had one of his parishioners come and say, well, can't we give space in our building to the White Citizens Council to meet? And he said, no, if you feel you want them here, then you don't want me here. So they're not people completely devoid of integrity and courage. In this instance, I think, as I keep trying to think through this, and I'm not trying to excuse them at all. They missed the boat. I mean, they're on the wrong side of this letter. I think they didn't read the situation well. And I think when King responded about the letter says, shouldn't we negotiate? Dr. King is very clear that they had negotiated. Merchants in Birmingham had said they were going to remove signs like whites only and the like, and they didn't follow through. I mean, this King's intervention in Birmingham came after there had been some agreements to do some things, and the white merchants did not follow through. So they didn't read that situation well. So, I mean, I think part of this is, for me as a leader to really listen and try to get a picture of what's happening and listen deeply. I mentioned about leaning into the pain. That's critically important, to hear those stories. And then I think, you respond with courage and humility, and you don't always get it right. And one of the things I think I would fault both Bishop Hardin and Bishop Harmon for, in their later reflecting back on this incident, neither of them really said, we missed it.
Right.
Yeah.
There's an acknowledgement of the beauty of King's letter and the power of King's letter, maybe some small sense that, we maybe didn't quite get it right, but not enough of a sense of, we really missed it in that particular instance. And sometimes as a leader or as a bishop, you don't get it right. And then you say, I didn't get it right, and I'm going to come at this again and seek to do better.
That's a wonderful. Rico and I were both nodding at that. I know that was something that you unearthed in your research and told me about.
And it did inform the way that I approached the Hardin character. How do you never reconcile? Where were you in 1963 that years later you still can't reconcile? You still can't admit that you were in the wrong place historically. That absolutely informed how I approached it. These men thought that they were doing the right thing. They thought that they were. There's a wonderful oral history of Hardin, where he talks about the things that he did. They felt that they were on the cutting edge, that they were moving their community in the right direction.
This reminds me in the work or the movement we're building here in Lansing called Congregations Organizing for Racial Reconciliation. It's a three-legged stool of work for racism. One leg is education, one leg is internalization work, and then the third leg is institutional work. But how important that internalization work is, that reflection internally to root out the roots of racism that progressively you become aware of. And something I think Bishop Palmer, you said earlier, just hit me as well, that racism impacts all of us. It impacts people of color, but it also impacts white people as well in absorbing these negative or what we call internal racial superiority. That hurts us as well. I feel like we could talk for a long time. We could keep talking all night long, but I'm cognizant of the time, and that's why we have planned 4 episodes for this, for the conversation to keep going. So, friends, join me in the comments section of thanking Bishop Bard, Bishop Palmer, Rico, Nor, and Jeff, who played Paul Hardin. This has just been an excellent reflection time today. I hope, friends, that you'll join us over the next 3 weeks as we continue this exploration. You just got the first third of the Letter from Birmingham Jail. So next week will be the second third, and the third in the third week, and then in the fourth week we'll stitch it all together every Saturday in March at 7 p.m. Next Saturday in episode 2, we will have a couple of guests here in the studio. One of those is David Hornack. He is the superintendent of schools for the Holt School District. And I had recently announced that Peter Spatafor was going to be the other person in the studio with us. Peter is the Lansing City Council chair or president. Peter let me know today that he wasn't actually able to join us. So we're working on finding another government official next week, because I feel like white leaders of education and white leaders, I want to be in conversation with white leaders in education and white leaders in the government about what Martin Luther King Jr. has to say for them. So I hope you'll come back next week and join us for that. We would then in episode 3, Pastor Sean Holland, he is the pastor of Epicenter of Worship and the director of transformational leadership at One Love Global. He will be with us in the studio, and he'll be having a conversation with us. We're working on maybe getting somebody else that week. Yes. And then I don't actually have a slide for it, but I'm super excited about episode 4. You just confirmed that our guest. You want to announce who that is?
Gloria Davis, who was actually one of the marchers, one of the children who marched in Birmingham, will be joining us for the 4th episode.
She was in attendance last year. She stood up after it was over, and she announced that she'd been a child in the marches, and the room went silent. And it was one of those Miss Davis moments. Yes.
She was vital in my preparation for this piece.
So she will be joining us in that 4th episode here in the studio when we stitch all of them together. And then have someone who is actually there reflecting with us. So I hope you go to Facebook and join us in those events. Friends, we are so grateful that you, again, have joined us today. Until next Saturday at 7 p.m., be curious, be creative, be compassionate, and peace out.
Thank you.
Yo, sweet Jesus, hop on the track like what up, though? I know who I am, but they thinking they too sharp, running a scam like Cutco. But I have a plan, I hope you plan to keep up, though. I don't think you understand that you're greater than that life they try to sell you. So hold up to something I need to tell you, and I think that this thing can really help you. These suckers try to tell us that we can't shake it, But my God, I know where we can take it. And I know every day you're facing your giants. But my God, I believe we're destined to triumph. Now let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. There will always be more doubters than supporters. When the vision seems too big, they either gon' hate or ignore ya. I guess it is what it is, but you just gotta stay focused. Ay, don't put your hope in the hopeless. Ay, remember that you are all chosen, ay, and you can move mountains to motion. And these suckers try to tell us that we can't shake it. But my God, I know where we can take it. And I know every day you're facing your giants. But my God, I believe we're destined to triumph. Now let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Things start moving slow, and they keep closing doors, and you don't wanna move no more. Remember, just refocus on the goal. Things start moving slow, and they keep closing doors, and you don't wanna move no more. Remember, just refocus on the goal. Now let me take you to the promised land. Let's go, let's go,